Welcome to PCM Podcast, a series of informative podcasts with experts in their fields, exploring a wide range of topics and payments. The theme for this session is harnessing AI to achieve hyper-automation in payments. Automation has traditionally focused on simple, repetitive tasks, replacing unskilled labor with machines and software. Now, the increased availability of computer power, coupled with readily available state-of-the-art open-source algorithms, has made it possible to automate more complex tasks. This trend of applying advanced technologies, including AI and machine learning, to increasingly automate processes is known as hyperautomation and has been identified by Gartner as the #1 strategic technology trend in 2021. This strategic trend is driving cost savings and is expected to save 20 to 30% of human effort. It is also enabling entirely new business models and ways of working. However, for an organization to leverage AI for decision making within its core business, there is a prerequisite for the organization to be data aware. I'd like to introduce our expert for the day, David Daly. David is the scientific community editor-in-chief at Worldline. He has worked within the technology industry for over 20 years in a variety of roles, including developer, analyst, technical architect, and development manager. David, welcome.
Thank you, Alex. Really nice to join you on the podcast today.
Super. Okay, let's just jump straight in with a nice big broad question. What do you think about the advances of AI in industry in general globally?
So I think you mentioned a couple of points about this in your intro there. So what we've seen, I think, over the last 10 years is that AI has really gone from being a research pursuit in the labs through to something that has become more accessible and able to be used more widely and applied to a range of different problems. And I think you mentioned two of the reasons for that, and one is the availability of algorithms, many of them open source. That makes it much more accessible. And also, as you said, it's not just algorithms, but it's also having the compute power available to run those algorithms. But there are a couple of other interesting things which I think have led to that shift. And so one is around digitization. So because more and more activities, and we see this in payments, are being performed digitally, that means more and more of us are leaving a kind of a data trace behind us everywhere we go. And not all, but many AI algorithms have to be trained, and they have to be trained using large sets of data. And because of that digitization over the last 10 years, there are now these huge volumes of data that can be used to train AI algorithms. The other one I was thinking about is acceptability, really. So I think now most of us are used to encountering AI day to day in our interactions with services. So, for example, when we phone up, it's not a shock to have some voice recognition helping to route our call to the right part of the organization. Or if we're on Facebook and we're tagging photos, it's not a surprise that it's recommending who might be in the photo for you. So I think generally we're all becoming much more used to AI helping us to do things. So it's that combination really of the availability of data and also the acceptability and just how accustomed we are to AI in our lives now.
So I guess one thing that I've been interested in is the quality of data that goes into the machine, right? So from the early days where you had, virtually zero data, and now you've got great big data sets. Is that growing exponentially, and do you get a better result from that?
So I think you're absolutely right. In general, not just at Worldline, the amount of data we're processing and the amount of data being stored has been growing exponentially and continues to grow exponentially. What was quite interesting, I was working with some experts towards the end of last year at Worldline to write a paper on AI and automation. And we talked a little bit about the data topic. Because yes, there are some algorithms that have to be trained with data where you label the data sets. So these are usually recognition algorithms. So you have thousands of photos and you say, well, this one's a dog, this one's a cat, this one's a sheep. And by labeling those data sets, then the AI algorithm can learn to identify those objects for itself. But there are also algorithms that work by you simply telling them what good looks like, what success is, and then the algorithm optimizes itself to try and achieve that goal in the best way possible. And so those algorithms don't need data labeling at the start. You can put them into production and they can learn and they can evolve for themselves, if that makes sense. The other thing that, of course, for Worldline is a really important topic is ownership of data and the permission to use data. So, of course, if the data belongs to another organization or is coming from an individual, then that data can't be used without their consent and their permission to use it in a certain way. But again, we found various ways that you can overcome this. So, for example, you can hand over a kind of bootstrap algorithm to a client. They can run the algorithm on their training data, so you don't have access to the data, and then give you the trained algorithm back to run in production, if that makes sense. So it's a huge topic how data plays into AI.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I mean, I guess that's on a consumer level as well. Just thinking about GDPR and what we allow our data to be used for. I mean, are those rules set up already, or are those rules? Do you think that's a kind of regulatory set of rules that will come down the line at a later point?
I think we understand the GDPR side of things quite well if we look at legislation, and that's really protecting individuals' data. Of course, what this means is if you have collected data for 5 years, but those people never consented it to be used for a particular purpose, and then you want to use that data to train an AI algorithm, the answer is you can't do that. You have to think of it at the outset. The area where I think regulation is still evolving is in terms of the sovereignty of data that belongs to organizations. So GDPR covers individuals, but it doesn't cover organizations. But again, being a bit more practical, what we've seen in our experience is that organizations are willing to share data, but only if they can retain control over it and if they can see a benefit to sharing that data. They don't want to share the data if there's no benefit for them and if they then feel they would be losing control of how that data is used in the future. Sure.
And I guess that's understandable. So let's be a bit more specific now. Let's talk about AI and payments. That's what Worldline is best known for, I guess. So, perhaps just give us an overview of where you see broadly AI playing out in the payments industry.
So I think there's probably 3 categories of kind of use cases. And I think the first thing we have to understand is that consumers now, if we start with consumers, they have an everything now mindset. I want to watch a film, so I open Netflix and I choose the film and I start watching it. I don't have to drive to a shop. I don't have to rent a DVD. It's all very instant. It's all very much something that's happening to you now. And what that means is 2 things, really. Part of that frictionless experience is often driven by AI. So again, to take the Netflix example, I think 75% of the choices people make are being made as a result of what's recommended to them using the AI algorithms that Netflix uses for recommendations. The second thing is it's a very frictionless experience that people are looking for now. And that's again where AI can help sometimes, because you can't, if you want to serve people quickly and in a frictionless way, then you have to be able to perform checks quickly. And that often means if you introduce a manual step, it will take too long. And that's where AI can often help, because it enables that frictionless user experience. So I think there's that user experience side. There is then also an efficiency side. So what we're seeing is all organizations, Worldline as well internally, but if we look at our clients, are seeking to improve efficiency. And that means things like screening calls using voice recognition. It means auto-responding to emails or having chatbots, even if it's only for the first interactions, and even if it can only resolve a certain percentage of queries, it's making it better for the end user because they're getting access to help sooner, but also it's increasing the efficiency of the organization. And then the last one, I think, is really where we start to look at transformative business models, and that's where AI starts to let you do things at a speed which just wouldn't have been practical if you had to do it all with humans operating the systems.
Sure. Okay, and so I guess we've discussed around data and permissions as being a challenge, to making this a better product for the consumer and more, simply integrated for the business. But so, let's talk a little bit about challenges. What do you see as some of the major challenges coming down the line? And also, just while I pose the question, is it different for Europe and the USA and Asia as an example, or do you think that globally the same challenges occur?
Well, again, if I was going to break down the challenges and use quite formal sounding words, I would say you've got explainability, you've got accountability, um, and then you've got a whole side around the ethics part. So if we start with explainability, often in a so just to take a step back, when Facebook is advising you whether to tag a photo or deciding what post to show you in your timeline, it's very good, and it's useful for people to be presented with things that they're interested in. But actually, it doesn't matter that much if you get shown a post that is not as interesting for you, for example. Whereas if you start declining someone's loan application, for example, this is a real material impact on someone's life. And once you have that, then there is generally an expectation that you can explain why a decision was reached. So what was it about someone's application that meant that you refused their loan? Um, Similarly, there's the question of accountability, and again, the example that everyone knows about is driverless vehicles, where the question becomes if there is an accident, who is accountable? Who's legally responsible for that, and who could get taken to court? Um, but in all business decisions, we expect people to stand by and be accountable for the actions they take. Now, if you start to use AI to make decisions, well, where does that accountability rest? And again, now thinking a little bit more in the payments space, we didn't really talk about it in the paper, but something we're also looking at Worldline is the kind of the future of autonomous payments. So machine to machine payments, or AI bots making payments on your behalf. Well, if an AI algorithm decides to buy something for you and makes the payment, and you decide you're not happy with the result, can you make a chargeback? I mean, who's a decision was made, but you can't really help. It's not the AI algorithm's money. So as I say, all these things are challenges that you have to understand and you have to think about in order to apply AI in what I'd call sort of real world industrial settings.
So, would it be fair to say that what that the potential of AI is still very much in its infancy? I understand the point about chatbots and all this kind of stuff, but when we're sort of fast forwarding, if we were to put our futurists caps on, we'd say that AI is going to be embedded far more in the future than it currently is, or do you think that it's just always got this sort of reasonably stable position to play now?
I think it's definitely, and again, coming back to the kind of the rise of AI, I think we're reaching a sort of tipping point and a pivot. And where I would how I would try and explain it is that some aspects of AI are actually relatively mature. So being able to recognize speech and convert that to text, being able to recognize the written word, even handwriting, and translate that into electronic format, those are fairly mature technologies. And actually, most businesses either are already or could benefit by applying those to certain sort of business processes inside their organizations. Where I think it becomes trickier is when you are using AI to make business decisions of some kind. So you're actually taking a decision that has an impact on your profit or on the relationship with the client, and you're using AI to do that. Um, and there I would divide it into two camps really. One is where you use AI in an advisory capacity. So this is where you don't actually take the decision, but you use AI to make recommendations to humans who then take the final decision. And that helps a lot with accountability and explainability. The other camp is the fully autonomous decision making. And that's where you really have to understand what tolerance you have for giving autonomy to the AI algorithms, And I'm trying to think of a good example there, but perhaps our fraud detection would be a good case where what we started doing in Worldline is so originally all our fraud detection was rules based. So you configured rules based on experts who understood what fraudulent behavior might look like. What we then did was we started by using AI algorithms to analyze previous transactions, both fraudulent and non-fraudulent, but use that analysis to set up new rules that experts would not necessarily have identified. Now, this is still quite controlled, if that makes sense, because you can still see the rules. You can see why the AI has thought of what it has, but it is giving you some benefit. What we've now started to introduce is real-time AI analysis of transactions, and what happens is the output from the AI algorithm is used as one indicator for the likelihood that a particular transaction is fraudulent, but not the only one. So you see there's a kind of check and a balance there where we're still using the kind of manually configured rules-based engine. We're using rules that are configured by AI, but then we're also using AI in real time, and we're complementing all three approaches. And what we found was if you complement all three together, you get the best result. It's not really use one or the other. It's building the three together that's given us the result. And I think that would transfer to a lot of different domains.
That's very interesting. Thanks, David. I mean, so we've talked a little bit around fraud and how AI can be used positively by the industry to protect ourselves, to protect the customer. Is there any way in which AI and specifically this kind of hyper automation can be used by fraudulent actors against the industry? Just the sheer weight of numbers in terms of the attacks that they can promote now. Any thoughts around that?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that, as we touched on earlier, with more and more digital interactions being conducted now, that of course means the scope for cybercrime is far greater than it was, say, 10 years or certainly 20 years ago. The sheer number of possibilities to exploit those interactions has increased. You're also right that AI opens up new ways for attackers to, just like increased compute power has made it possible to do brute force attacks, AI opens up new avenues of creating bots and things that can look more real and behave more like humans in their interactions. So it gives them a new tool in their tool set. And there are other sort of specific challenges that you have to be aware of with AI algorithms. So I mentioned to you earlier that some AI algorithms can learn whilst they're in production. So they adapt themselves based on the data that they're processing. But of course, that means that attackers can, by careful manipulation of the data being fed into the algorithm, change the behavior in the algorithm in a way that is to their benefit. So I think it's in some ways it's not new because cybercrime has always been a concern and is a concern in any kind of digital interaction. But yes, there are specific aspects that companies really have to understand and appreciate, and have to be very careful of not just running forwards into using AI without understanding some of those specific challenges.
Sure. Okay. So we've talked broadly around some of the good bits. We've talked some of the bad bits, but I'm kind of interested about if you put your future hat on, some of the use cases, some of the positive use cases that you specifically see, perhaps 2 or 3 or maybe 4 years down the line from AI.
I think it's a really good question, and certainly in payments, what we're looking at internally at the moment is what will be the rise of autonomous payments or machine-to-machine payments. And I think what we are seeing a lot of talk about now is frictionless payments. So the idea that just the act of walking out of a shop might trigger the payment, so you're not having to do anything. But I think autonomous payments is really another level where transactions are being completed on your behalf without any instruction from you to do so. So this, we see basic examples now is the idea of that if you run out of milk in the fridge, it will order some, another pack for you. But this would be the next level where it's actually able to anticipate when you need things, potentially negotiate on price, potentially look at multiple suppliers, take into account multiple factors like stock levels, price, how soon it would be delivered, etc., and then complete those transactions for you, which I think is both fascinating on a sort of philosophical and a technical level, but of course it also opens up a whole Pandora's box of issues around compliance and trust, and what happens when an AI bot completes a transaction on your behalf, and you decide actually you didn't want it to do that. So I'd say that's an interesting area for us at the moment.
Okay, and so finally, I think there will be a number of companies out there listening to this podcast, and they'll be thinking, okay, that's all well and good for a company the size of Worldline and many others out there who are using AI to their benefit and advantage. But what's my starting point? Where can I get aboard the AI train? Do you have any kind of specific advice for slightly smaller companies, some of the benefits that they could get hold of from AI?
I think it's really good when you're looking at how you can take advantage of AI to really break it down into two categories. And the first is where you can really use off-the-shelf products and services that are built on AI, and you can take advantage of those to get some benefits. So that's things like speech recognition, optical character recognition, many of the things in what we refer to as the perception layer, helping computers see things or understand things that usually only humans would be able to do. And I guess I'd also maybe slightly selfishly promote Worldline on that front. But again, if you're a retailer, you don't really want to be building payment fraud detection systems. That's not your core business. And that's where you need to rely on and challenge your payments providers to be doing that on your behalf. So as I say, there's part of the AI story is really about spotting use cases where quite mature AI technologies can be used to give you some benefit. There is then, for most companies, a much smaller part where you might want to be doing some research and development yourself. And again, the advice, or the general advice I think we'd give any company, and it's based on our journey, is you really have to think about, well, what's core to your business? What data do you have that could be used to train algorithms in that area? And that's where you should focus your energies if you are going to be doing any bespoke AI development. But usually, it really will be an 80-20 rule where you should be able to get 80% of your AI benefits by using components and off-the-shelf products provided by others, and then you focus and target your investments on the aspects that will really give you the strategic advantage in the market.
Okay, thanks, David. So I think that's our time up. I'd just like to mention that David's referred to a white paper a few times. If you're just listening to this, both on the Worldline website, on PCM website under the podcast section, and on our YouTube channel where these will all be hosted, that white paper will be available. So if you're wanting or looking for supplementary information, then please do visit one of those places and you should find it. So from my perspective, David, thanks very much. That's been really, really interesting, and some very clear explanations of what we have, what's coming down the line, some of the challenges, threats even, but also a lot of positives in there. So really appreciate your time today, and look forward to speaking to you again soon.